Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining today. We're going to give people a few more minutes to get hopped on and logged in here, but overall, I think we should just get started and take it away, and then more people join. They can watch the recording if they miss anything. So my name is John LeBaron. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today, The Great Debate, Revenue versus Profit, why today's top sales leaders are considering profitable growth versus revenue at all costs. That is a mouthful. I'm joining you here from Hebron, Kentucky. Steve Ellis and Jared, I believe, are both in Utah today, but wanted to get started and introduce you to them. They will be on our panel list, and they are great, today's sales leaders. So my name is John LeBaron. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Pattern. And I think it might make sense actually for you to introduce yourself, Jared and Steve. So Jared, maybe I can go to you first and just give a quick background on you and the company you work for, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, great. First of all, thanks for having me, John. I work for Owlet and have for about 3.5 years. Owlet is a brand that helps parents navigate the early years of parenthood, and we have products that provide peace of mind, and it's a really cool, fun company to work for. Like I said, I've been here for about 3.5 years. And you know, my background, I've worked with several local brands, consumer brands here locally in Utah, including Goal Zero and a few others. But been partnered and working with Pattern for about 18 months now, and looking forward to talking to everybody about some growth versus profitability.
Awesome. How about you, Steve?
Yeah, thanks, John. Steve Ellis here, Vice President of Sales at Pattern. I've been at Pattern now for almost 4 years. Prior to Pattern, I spent the better part of 20 years in the enterprise software space, managing and building sales teams. And essentially my entire career, I've helped large organizations solve challenging business dilemmas by using technology, by using data, by using software, to help innovate and transform their business into a place of profitability and growth and just overall health.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. As a quick reminder to all attendees of the webinar, this session is being recorded, and a recording will be sent out afterwards. If you have questions during this webinar for the panelists, feel free to use the Q&A feature or the chat feature in the Zoom module, and I will try to read through those as I moderated the session and bring them in front of the panelists as well. So again, thank you guys so much for joining, and let's get after it. So high level, as you guys saw from the intro, there is this kind of great debate going on between sales professionals and particularly in kind of the consumer product manufacturer space. And this is what we wanted to chat about today. And honestly, if you have your own experiences that you wanted to share, again, this is kind of a tricky forum just because everyone is muted, but if you want to add that through the Q&A feature or the chat feature, again, happy to hear some of those experiences and where you're at. But the great debate is basically this, you know, do you go after revenue at all costs? Or do you really focus on profitable growth? And some of the things that we started to see, and one of the reasons I invited Steve to join is because honestly, he's worked with probably, I don't know, 60, 65 of the 70, 80 plus brands that we now work with at Pattern today. So he's seen and engaged with many different sales organizations in this realm and being able to kind of see some of this play out firsthand. So again, the debate is this: do you go after just revenue, or do you have to focus on profitable growth? And our kind of what we're seeing, and part of this discussion today, we'll be seeing that, you know, really revenue at all costs is somewhat of an outdated sales paradigm. And really what we're starting to see is that as more functions, if you kind of see this, you know, revenue at all costs model, a lot of times what you'll see is just growth, but then you see waning profitability, which we'll see today. And so part of that is exploring, and I've seen everything in between. I've seen sales teams only focus on revenue. I've seen a lot of sales teams start to include profitability targets, and some that are advanced as profitability targets by channel. Everyone is on their own journey. This is not to say it's good versus bad. It's just kind of where we see everything kind of coming together. So to that end, as we see that, some of the best sales leaders are increasingly focused on, you know, this profitable omni-channel growth in their organizations. And the way that they're doing that is basically being able to look across and working more closely, like with their finance teams, for examples, or their business operations teams, and understanding how is profitability varying across channels. So Steve, maybe I'll just open this kind of first one up to you. Is how are you seeing this play out in the brands that you interact with? And maybe what are some of the questions that you're getting asked as you get approached or have these discussions with sales leaders around profitability? How often is profitability kind of coming up, especially, maybe particularly in the e-commerce space?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's great about this role is the diversity of the companies that we speak to across multiple channels. It doesn't matter if it's pet or baby, health and household, consumer electronics. All these brands and all these sales leaders are facing the same challenge. I mentioned I spent most of my career in the enterprise software space and had the opportunity to work with some of who I consider the best sales leaders in the entire country, in the entire world. I mean, absolute successful, driven, goal-oriented sales leaders. What's interesting when I came over to Pattern is I realized that none of us in that previous role were really held to a P&L statement. There was really top-line growth. And so what I considered a successful sales leader is someone that said, hey, I've got a $950 million quota that's been given to me. I'm going to build the process. I'm going to build the sales organization to go hit that $950 million target. And that's what they were absolutely focused on. But as I came over to Pattern and started speaking to these different brands, I realized that there was a different breed of sales leadership, and these leaders really dug into their organization and wanted to understand, hey, why is there this anomaly? Why do I have a sales rep in Lenexa, Kansas that's doing more revenue than anyone else in the entire country? Instead of just rewarding that salesperson, they're digging into that and finding out, is that person doing something different? Is something happening that's an anomaly within my business? And as they started to dig into that, they realized that there was this broader challenge that was happening around profitability that was ultimately hurting their organization. And so, again, doesn't matter what category they're in, some of the best sales leaders that I've seen in the last 4 years are the ones that understand that they have this challenge and they need to address it now. It's not just about top line revenue growth.
Yeah, I just might add that I don't think, top line revenue growth and profitability are mutually exclusive. I think there is a path to do both. And I think that's what you were just alluding to. And you're right. The best sales leaders do both. They grow the business and they do it, somewhat profitably. So.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting, obviously, like, again, I don't want to villainize anyone here or vilify, I guess, whatever the word is. It's really like, we just see these market forces operating, and we here even a pattern on our own journey in the sales organization to focus on more profitability metrics. But what I will say is part of the reason that you see an increased focus on profitability, honestly, is because so many of the organizations, at least that I speak with, when they really start to dig in and understand what's happening in their business, what they see is, somewhat counterintuitive. What they see is, wait, e-commerce is my fastest growing channel. And when they dig a little deeper, they say, wait a second though, in our kind of position, once we help them kind of understand the dynamics of what's happening, some of which we'll get through today, is, yeah, it's your fastest growing channel, but it's also the channel that is eroding your profit faster than any other channel. And then it's like, well, wait, that doesn't even make sense. It's growing the fastest, but it's hurting my profit. How? And the reason it's hurting your profit is because it's the channel that's eroding your price the fastest. So I wanted to kind of spend some time, and maybe you can speak to this, Jared, either in your current organization or organizations you've worked with, but what we see is, why is e-commerce eroding price? Well, generally, and maybe I'll go through these real quick and then kind of get to the question here, or the meat of it, which is, first off, e-commerce is eroding price because of broad distribution. So, traditionally everyone wanted broad distribution because that's how you sell more stuff. And it's like in a retail kind of brick and mortar mindset, you want as much distribution as possible. That's why you use distributors. That's why you have many retail partners. That's why you just get, geographic expansion, international expansion. It's all about, kind of more doors, so to speak. The issue is that with the rise of e-commerce, and really a technology sale, and everyone buying either on D2C, buying on marketplaces, you kind of get this price transparency that you never had. You used to have discrete channels like club, convenience, retail, specialty retail, that you could have different prices, or the retailers could set their own price, and it didn't really affect the customer that much. But now that everyone has a smartphone too, right? So you have these forces that are happening with the rise of smartphones, the rise of more e-commerce or online shopping, that gives everyone visibility and that what everyone is selling the price for. And so, I would say that, price differentials used to actually be your friend in some ways. And now price transparency creates a lot of channel conflict, because as you see on this third piece of the slide, everyone feels compelled to match the price so they don't lose the sale with the customer. And that in turn creates a lot of just helter-skelter kind of behavior around, holy crap, how do I stabilize pricing across all channels? Because actually every customer wants to go to the channel that's most convenient for them, right? You might want the 2-day shipping. You might want to buy it right there within the store. You might want to have a direct relationship with the D2C so that you can get loyalty points or better warranty coverage or better customer service or whatever it looks like. So there are obviously really nice merits to each of the channels that you can go into, but having price discrepancies in the mix, you can really kind of shoot yourself in the foot. So Jared, maybe I'll kind of get to you on this front. How are you seeing, or how have you seen maybe even in your career, the impact of price erosion? And maybe what are some of the things you guys have done to either address it or mitigate it or plan for it? Because obviously, again, it's a big problem we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with Amazon, closely for 12 to 15 years, and I've seen a lot of different things and happen with price erosion. Earlier and at Outlet, we've really done our best to eliminate, take the learnings that I've had over a long period of time and implement those learnings to eliminate price erosion as much as possible. And sometimes, it can happen really quick. We had an experience almost 2 years ago with Amazon where we saw within a matter of days, our price drop from, like $60 in price in just a couple of days with a few retailers. It only takes one rogue seller to have it go that quick and drive that price that low. I've also seen it happen very, very slow, and sometimes you don't even notice that it's happening, over a period of months. You just start just $1 at a time, 50 cents at a time, you start seeing your price erode. And so, what Outlet really does to, and what I've seen really work is the first thing is you've got to be choosy. You know who the partners are, who the shady business people are that might go in and, drop price because they can't win any way else other than dropping price. So you want to look for partners that add value on their own merits. And probably the biggest thing that we've done is, at Outlet, we don't work with any distributors. We have a direct relationship with all of our retail partners, and that way it really allows us to control our distribution. So, that's been our experience, and not saying that it's perfect, but I think we are pretty good at managing our pricing and eliminating or limiting the price erosion.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And in fact, we had a comment come in while you were chatting that I think I'll add here because I think it's super relevant to what you were just talking about. It says, for some businesses, online retailers were supplied by distributors in the past, but now brands are bypassing the distributor and selling directly to online retailers. As such, working directly with online retailers is increasing profits for now, which I think is obviously true, right? Like if you bypass that kind of point of friction and go directly to the retailer, you can actually, in some ways, improve your profit for that specific channel, assuming that your price doesn't get eroded, which maybe is kind of probably some of the challenges that we see with brands working directly with Amazon, is Amazon isn't necessarily willing to respect those prices or their MAP policies. And so even though, quote unquote, your margin could go up because you have a direct relationship with Amazon, if the price drops, then overall that can start that, you know, they're going to come back, ask for concessions. They're going to ask, you know, your annual negotiations. The price they're paying today will not be the price they pay in a year. So that can be tricky. Steve, what kind of friction have you seen with, you know, on this subject, I guess, related to just price erosion overall, and this dynamic of, you know, e-commerce creating this like super transparent, you know, paradigm within customers and within retailers that everyone gets to see the price now, and how these kind of price escalations and price wars impact some of the brands that you've engaged with?
Yeah, I mean, looking at this slide, I mean, none of these three things are new. It's just that e-commerce has created, I mean, it's really exacerbated the challenge. And the challenge is a fundamental loss of control that brands are seeing. And you know, you might be a brand saying, well, I've sold through two-tier distribution for 50 years. So like going away from that model would never work. You know, we need that to support our brick and mortar channels, which are much larger than e-commerce today. Totally understandable. But you still have to figure out a solution to this fundamental lack of control. And again, the best brands, or the brands that are really the leaders in this space, are identifying where these leaks are happening and how that's really disrupting kind of what that blast radius is from that one distributor that's selling, you know, to different retailers that are ultimately selling on Amazon or Walmart or different marketplaces. But the price matching is a really interesting concept, and I mean, it's obviously something we all take advantage of, and it's a great program. But in a lot of ways, what we're seeing now is what it's doing is it's trying to just find a way to mitigate a challenge that the brick and mortar retailers are seeing, and keep them happy, because you're seeing overall price erosion and brand erosion. And so your Best Buys, your PetSmarts, your REIs are calling you up saying, hey, I can't compete on your business. The Amazon dilemma has created an environment that I can't find a profitable space. So what do? You go and you fix it by giving them a short-term solution of price matching. And so we've seen brands, some cutting massive checks monthly and quarterly, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to really just put a Band-Aid on a problem that is not going to go away. It's just going to get larger. And until you dive down into your business and understand fundamentally what is creating this loss of control and how do I go and address it, those checks are going to keep getting bigger and bigger, and this challenge is going to keep getting larger.
Yeah, I think it's some really good points. So, you know, one of the things I often hear is like, okay, well, listen, like, if I'm getting the same wholesale revenue, why do I care? You know, why do I really care about what the retailer, whether it's Amazon or some other brick and mortar retailer, why do I care what they sell it to the end customer? And so, you know, one of the things we see a lot is this price erosion. Now, Tommy Copper is a, you know, real brand we've worked with, you know, great products, but they definitely went into this tailspin. This is actual data on their ASIN from both third-party sellers and Amazon of price competition overall. This is a product that started, you know, up in the 30s, mid $30, and really over a period of, you know, 18 months dropped down to $3. So you kind of have this race to not even wholesale. It's just like a race to the crap out, basically, from Amazon, which is pretty insane. So I think this is what we're talking about, and maybe I'll just go through some of the dynamics as well. So we talked about channel conflict for a second, which really can come back in the form of what you were talking about over here, Steve, of billbacks or concessions or price match guarantees. And to your point, you know, yeah, we work with brands that are having to cough up $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a month, depending on how big the issue is, just to keep those retailers placated. On the flip side, by the way, when you do get into control, we've seen that swing the other way, where those brands, and we'll talk about this a little later, but where the brands are able to go back to the retailer and say, listen, our prices on Amazon are just the same as they are on your website, or even some cases that they're even higher than they are on your website today. We're not going to pay any more. We're not going to cut you any more of these checks. So I think it is worth, you know, recognizing that the pendulum can swing both ways. So for sure, you know, brick and mortar partners saying, we're going to take you off our shelf. We're going to decrease your shelf space. We're going to promote somebody else. We're not going to give you the end caps. We're not going to run you and our Prime Day specials, like whatever it looks like. There's a lot of kind of threatening there. So I wanted to get into this next kind of topic around the death spiral, this profitability death spiral. And we talked about, a little bit of what leads to this wide distribution, that price transparency, people with smartphones, they can now see everything, that creating that price erosion that we talked about, but then, price erosion across all of those channels. So I wanted to kind of walk into this a little bit, maybe walk through the exercise and then actually go to the death spiral illustration and have you guys comment on a couple of different sides, because I think people would be interested to get your thoughts. And again, for everyone listening, if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat feature to weigh in, and we'll get to those. But, again, high level, a few years ago, I think this is mostly what a traditional retailer may have looked like, depending on, the industry. You mentioned pet, you mentioned, sports and outdoor. So obviously you can't represent all different industries here, but at a high level, you have a strong brick and mortar national retailer kind of presence. Amazon wasn't that big for most brands, unless they were born online. It was just kind of we routinely run a brand still that Amazon's only 8, 10, 12% of their business. And so this was kind of, again, traditional look. You had a distribution, healthy distribution business. Then what happened over time is really Amazon started to grow and represent a much larger share of the brand's business. And because the marketplace side has continually grown for sure on Amazon's business as well, many brands experience distribution growth as well, because you had this race of third-party sellers, whether they were authorized or unauthorized, hitting your distributors and saying, hey, I want some of this product. I want to be able to get a hold of it. And so you actually saw distribution sales grow up as well. You didn't never necessarily always know how they were getting, liquidating that product, if it was legit, if they were selling on their own website, they were selling on specialty, online retail or whatever, or if it's actually getting, kicked off on Amazon. But then you started to see a little bit more of that, lowering of prices. So maybe, at a high level, you saw for a long time profit and revenue kind of growing together. But then, and maybe hasn't been this dramatic, you saw revenue increasing as e-commerce grew. And this is kind of what I was saying earlier, like many brands say, Amazon's my fastest growing channel. And my question is always, cool, that's good news. Is your profit margin keeping pace with the growth of the revenue, or is it starting to flag? And I don't mean just your profit margin on Amazon. I mean across all these different channels, because now you might be being hit with those concessions or buybacks or, all that channel conflict that we talked about. And that really is all happening here that's causing this profitability to suffer. And so again, I would just say, many sales leaders, it's almost like they see it happening, but they don't know all the factors. They don't know the levers. Many of the people, the CFO sees it, right? The people in finance see it, but they don't know who's the culprit. They just see it kind of happening. So again, maybe I'll get into this, death spiral graphic here real quick. So high level, we kind of been through this, but I want to just walk you guys through and then ask you some questions, which is, okay, e-commerce booms. Bunch of third-party sellers flock to marketplaces. Your distribution sales go up. Your Amazon sales go up. Or in this case, could be, Walmart's marketplace, could be eBay, whatever, but we'll just use Amazon US as the example. Then this kind of like flocking of marketplace sellers or unauthorized sellers creates competition where they're wanting to lower the price to win the buy box. Then you lose the buy box. You get in this buy box kind of like tailspin. And this happens on 1P, 3P, whatever the model, just because of this kind of marketplace side of the business. Then your brick and mortar kind of start to match the prices. Then your retail profits erode because you're getting hit with all those, concessions and the buybacks and the price match guarantees and all that other stuff. Then your e-commerce profits erode because honestly, this we see a lot of brands come to us like, how do I deal with the crap out issue? Because now Amazon's coming back and asking for prices that really aren't even profitable anymore. And do I just use Amazon as a marketing channel now? Like they're in a world of hurt. And so ultimately all channels are less profitable than when you started. So we'll get into, kind of the flywheel of getting back to profitability, but I wanted to take a second and just walk through with you guys, Jared and Steve, where you kind of see the friction points either in your own organization or in previous organizations or with brands that you work with, et cetera. So Jared, maybe I can start with you. What areas do you see, some of this profitability death spiral coming into play?
Well, I just want to Yeah, for sure. I wanted to kind of comment. You meant like, hey, if I'm getting wholesale pricing, what does it matter? And if you haven't seen the ramifications that come from that, if you don't know what the ramifications are, you will eventually find out, because they do come. And you highlighted all the things that it come from. They could come back and ask for, additional funding to make their margin whole. They can kick you off their shelf. There's a lot of ramifications. I've talked about at Outlet, we try to cut this off at the head, right? We don't work with distributors. We really limit our who we partner with so that everybody has merits. We look for people that can survive on their own merits and not price alone. But we still see issues, and we were involved with, there was a theft ring that was part of it. So it takes one or two units to drop the price, and then all of a sudden another retailer matches that, and then another retailer matches that, and Amazon's matching that, and you're trying your hardest to get everybody to come back to the right price, and maybe you've gotten rid of that rogue seller that had the bad units, but everybody's pointing at each other and saying, you go first and you go first. And so in addition to the death spiral, it also creates issues with the retailers. Nobody wants to have conversations about pricing with retailers, and the retailers don't want to have them with us. And so there's serious ramifications by going down this, and it's a constant battle. It's a daily fight, because even if you have try to head as much of this off at the beginning, you're still going to run into these issues. So that's my comment. I don't know if that was what you're looking for, John, but
yeah, I think it totally makes sense. And I'm actually going to get to that point of distribution, because, you made an interesting comment, and there's also a comment that came through that I wanted to read as well, because it's all tied into this notion. But I think they're important, right? When we get to this in a second of how to kind of solve this, reverse the death spiral, and get into the profitability flywheel, I think it's really important to make sure we're clear that, it's important to have pricing policies and pricing integrity. But if you have a bunch of partners that could care less, or they couldn't care less about any of your pricing policies, then it's like, who cares? So it really is, you got to have a pricing policy that protects the integrity of your price, but you also have to be super, and I think you said this earlier, choosy around the people you choose to kind of entrust your brand with across these channels, because otherwise you just have blatant disregard for any of those policies, and there's too much pressure. The incentives are too great, whether it's third-party sellers getting a hold of your product through distribution, through gray market, through diverted, through stealing, theft rings. I mean, we see all of that here. The incentives are too high because there's money to be made in not respecting the pricing, basically, and getting a hold of your product in an illegitimate way. So, Steve, maybe you can also weigh in here on any of these kind of pieces of the death spiral that I walked through, and where you're seeing it impact brands kind of most urgently or negatively.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to hundreds of brands that are kind of in this death spiral, and what's fascinating to me is how quickly this whole thing can fall apart. And as soon as you start selling to Amazon, especially in the 1P space, and just to put it out there, if you're running a $10 million, $15, $20 million business with Amazon, or even a smaller one, 1P, it's really difficult to walk away from that, especially if it's growing, 30, 40, 50% year over year. Like you kind of think, why do I even want to mess with this? I have this number, I've got to go hit it, and I'm not going to go touch this. And so the timing by which this whole thing can happen is always really fascinating to me. A lot of times brands finally raise their hand when they're down at the very bottom of it, and their brick and mortar customers are frustrated. Amazon's coming back asking for additional discounts, and they don't know how to go and solve it. And the good news is it is absolutely solvable, but maybe the recommendation is to get ahead of this. If you're somewhere in kind of this process right now, dig into it and look for expertise that can help you and I know we're going to talk about this later on kind of what to do, but this can blow your business up really quickly in a really bad way. Because I mean, Amazon and e-commerce, some e-commerce marketplaces, it's like they're assassins, and they don't care about your brand, but your brick and mortar customers do. So if you can find a way to fix what's causing the problem, then your brick and mortar channels, and even some of the other marketplaces like Chewy and iHerb, I mean, they want to compete like gentlemen. They want to fight a fair fight. Amazon doesn't. And so that's where you have to focus your energy, is to figure out, how can I create a level playing field so that ultimately the consumer is the one that makes the decision. If the consumer wants to buy online, then they're going to pay $19.99. If they want to walk into a store, they're going to pay $19.99. If they go to Amazon, it's $19.99. That's competing on a level playing field. Anything other than that is going to continue down this death spiral.
Yeah, I love some of those comments you made, Steve. And I really do have to, take my hat off to some of the brands that we work with. The courage, honestly, like the easiest thing in a way for a sales leader to do is put your head down, hit your number, just go do it. But I'm so impressed with so many of the sales leaders that are forward thinking, and they're just saying, we got to get ahead of this. I'm almost willing to take a hit in my number this year to fix this problem. And I kind of just need to start over. We'd rather just take the hit, get the pain, cut it, and just have it go. And so I'm constantly impressed with the courage. It doesn't always have to happen that way, but at some level, there is going to be pain to try to kind of reverse this. But I tend to agree with you. I think you mentioned this the other day, like the lower you get down here, the more urgent it becomes. Yeah. This is like preventive medicine up here. And this is when it starts, right? We're never going to be able to reverse the clock on e-commerce booming and marketplaces booming. Like it's the marketplace side of Amazon. Jeff Bezos just testified in front of Congress a couple months ago. It said 60% of all sales are going through the marketplace now, going through third-party sellers. There's 4 or 5 million third-party sellers on the platform now. So I think it's really, you just got to figure out how to kind of deal with this. So when we talk about fixing the profitability flywheel, and again, I wanted to mention one of the comments that came through and invite any others that have questions or comments to weigh them in, but this profitability flywheel becomes pretty important. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of walk through, so it says in Europe, there's the major challenge that legally you cannot enforce minimum pricing, and therefore there's no map. The only real methods to reduce it are to work with very limited retailers or have such a small retailer margin that the discount does not take place. Will you share some successful examples that worked in Europe as well? So the good news is, yes, I didn't really give an overview of Pattern, but if you're not familiar with Pattern, we operate in, I think we're now up to, 18 different global offices. We've got 50 people in 3 different offices in China. We've got offices in the Middle East. We have offices in all throughout Europe. We've got offices in, Australia, 2 different offices and warehouses there. So we basically represent brands on marketplaces. Brands ship us all their stuff on big pallets. We buy their products, and then they say, make us awesome, help us get into control, help us execute a successful growth strategy on these marketplaces. And again, we'll ship 200,000 units out of our warehouse today across all of these different marketplaces into the hands of customers. And then we do all the advertising and the SEO and the customer service and the returns and all this sort of stuff to really help those brands. And so as we get into, I guess I bring that up because in the Europe side, you're absolutely right. You can't enforce MAP, but those 2 things I was talking about earlier, you've got to have a price policy, but you also have a very strong distribution policy. The pricing policy is important and it's not enforceable in Europe, but the distribution policy is you can have, and we call that selective distribution. And so at a high level, I wanted to kind of abstract this a little bit because the way to kind of get here is to rationalize this distribution, implement what we call the selective distribution, streamline it down, hopefully just to one seller, one authorized seller on the marketplace, or in some cases, a group of authorized sellers that are willing to abide by the pricing policies, or at least even the pricing recommendations if you're in Europe. And so that creates this stabilization of pricing And that kind of like stops the bleeding. And then what you have to do is you have to seek expertise in those partners to be able to like get the flywheel actually going. Because it's not enough to just stop the bleeding. And in some cases, it actually can do a lot of damage, because in some ways to stabilize pricing, it actually means raising your prices on the marketplace back to integrity, back to that, as Steve mentioned, price stability across all these different channels. And so you might be selling on Amazon for $12.99, and you got to raise your prices back up to $19.99. That can actually, hurt your trajectory. That can kill your kind of growth flywheel on Amazon, unless you have expertise and folks in your corner that know how to kind of overcome some of that negative momentum or headwinds that you're going to face. So one of the things that I kind of want to mention first before I come into the flywheel is just this notion of what selective distribution means and why it works. So I just wanted to kind of abstract for a second and go to this example of like a car dealership. So if you go to any major metropolitan kind of car dealer or metropolitan area in the US, you're going to have these kind of disparate car dealerships. So if you choose a brand like Toyota, you're going to have all these different Toyota dealerships. And the question is, well, what if you put all of those Toyota dealerships on the same street in that town? And if you did that, the inevitability would be they'd all have to kind of compete on price. Because if they're all in separate, if they're an hour away from each other, it's really hard for customers, even on a big ticket item like a vehicle, to go one by one, try to haggle, then go back, all this sort of stuff. And so if they're on one street, you could go in one, go out the other, go in one, and inevitably you'd have to kind of compete on price. And that's exactly what's happening in a marketplace environment, because all those sellers are basically selling on the same platform, and everyone gets to see price dynamically. And so literally the lowest price, there's tremendous downward pressure on the price, and that's what creates that erosion. So when we talk about this profitability flywheel, first of all, selective distribution, that's where it starts. Rationalizing, getting those people in your corner, whether again, it's in Europe or whether it's in the US or wherever you are, that are going to abide and be able to kind of like withstand the pressure, the peer pressure and the economic pressure of lowering the price. So that is what's going to lead to price stability. That price stability, once you have price stability, and it starts in many cases with Amazon, but the same would be true. You can't just fix Amazon and then you've got a bunch of other online retailers, including Walmart or eBay or other areas that aren't, your price is not fixed, then you'll end up with a suppressed buy box. So it's important to do this omni-channel, but that will give you the more leverage with retailers, because you're going to be able to go back in, and most of your competitors are going to have this problem of price discrepancy and lower prices on Amazon. And that'll allow you to get more shelf space. That'll allow you to get better concessions. That'll allow you to get more wholesale revenue from the retailer. So it'll kill all of those bill backs that you've been paying or any of those price match guarantees. So there's a lot of good stuff that happens when you get more leverage with those retailers. And that's important because, a lot of times, as I mentioned before, you might have 80%, at least in a pre-COVID world, 80-90% of your business going through brick and mortar. So losing that leverage is incredibly destructive to that profitability. So if you can build that, momentum and that leverage back up with the retailers, that's going to give you that better brick and mortar performance. That'll shore up the profitability that's been dragging down. Then you've got to figure out what I was saying before is how do you kickstart the growth? Because let's say you just raise the prices to $19.99. Well, crap, your velocity might suffer. And again, that was your fastest growing channel. Amazon was your fastest growing channel. So how do you get back on the wagon and turn this into a rocket ship? And that's when, making sure that if you've got a single authorized seller or maybe a group of authorized sellers, you get that buy box ownership. And this can obviously happen in a 1P environment too. But again, if Amazon isn't willing to respect your prices, it can still just create wreak that havoc over here. We have seen multiple brands be very successful in a 1P environment, but it generally means they are like draconian with every other website besides Amazon, and Amazon has no incentive to lower the price or to match it or to do whatever. So it's very tricky, but I wanted to make sure this is not a beat up session or a gang session on Amazon 1P, because it still can happen for sure. We think it's easier on a 3P model, but it can still happen 1P. What happens when you get buy box again, though, is you get better ad consistency and advertising performance, because suddenly you don't have to start and stop all of your ad campaigns, or your third-party seller doesn't have to continually fight for the buy box, because Amazon won't even let you run advertising unless you own the buy box. So if you have 30 sellers competing and constantly showing up the buy box, it just wreaks havoc on any ability for you to get consistency and efficiency in your ad spend and learning. And then the last thing I'll say that I think is really important as well is, if you have one authorized seller or two or three or whatever the number, a small number, it's a lot more likely that those sellers will stop trying to compete on price, and they will look at you as a long-term kind of revenue center for them, and they'll be willing to make those investments that are really critical to launching the Amazon flywheel of growth, which are things like better reviews, better images, better bullets and titles and SEO, all that better customer service, responding to any of these questions or complaints that customers have. So it's really important that you fix distribution and rationalize distribution and get control of the brick and mortar and price stability. But it's really important that you choose a partner that will also help you really accelerate the flywheel on the growth side to be able to get you back in business. Otherwise, you might kind of flounder, and that pain that I mentioned of losing the velocity on Amazon, instead of lasting a month or two, could last a year or two if you don't get it fixed. So again, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'll shut up now and kind of get back to you, Steve and Jared, on this front. And maybe I'll start with you this time, Steve. Like, what parts of this flywheel have you seen work really, really well? And what are some kind of misnomers or questions that you have, maybe misconceptions that people have about how to get this thing started and running without any friction?
Yeah, it's interesting because most brands come to us because they've lost control. And then there's a comment in the chat from Mindy around, actually doing enforcement and it doesn't do any good if you have a policy if you're not willing to enforce it. And I could not agree with you more. If you think about kind of our model, we're buying inventory. And so as soon as we partner with a brand, we'll turn around and place a large order for inventory. And we'll sit there on that inventory until all the marketplace is cleaned out, till 1P sells out of their inventory, till the third-party sellers are cleaned out. And so if the brand doesn't have the discipline, the rigor, or the appetite to go and take control, then this whole thing's really not going to work. And it's not something where you can just say, okay, we're going to do it for the next 6 months and then let it go. Like, this is an ongoing challenge that's not going away. And so, one of the things since I've been here that I'm most proud of is our high retention rate. And it's because, when we sit down and we talk about this with brands, and they're looking at us like, okay, are these guys going to represent my brand well? Is what they're saying true? But what maybe they don't realize is we're kind of going through the same evaluation. Like, how committed is this brand to really taking control of this? And the brands that want to punch these third-party sellers in the face and just take them behind the woodshed are the ones that we're like, yes, we want you guys, because that is what it's going to take to make this go. And so I like this slide, but the control is such a foundational play. Until you figure it out and are disciplined enough to continue to solve it day in and day out, then the growth piece is, you're never going to leverage it as much as you can. And a lot of times all you're doing is you're throwing more gasoline on a challenge that already exists that you're going to have to address down the road.
Yeah, sort of good comment. How about you, Jared?
So yeah, I totally agree. Like, the control side, it's a grind. You've got to do it. You've got to be committed to it. But I want to highlight the other side. If you're willing to grind and get the control side, like, the growth, it will come. I've a number of experiences over several different brands that when you keep the buy box clean, when you maintain control and do that whole control part of it, and you're able to focus on the growth side of it, your investments on paid search, your investment on SEO, your paid advertisements, all that sort of stuff. When you can, turn your attention to the growth side of it, we've seen our average daily sales will literally double, in a matter of days. That and all of a sudden we're just seeing this velocity, for better or worse, that the Amazon algorithm is quite incredible. And if you're committed to stay in control of the business on that side, and once you have that control, focus on the growth side of it, you can see some really, really great growth. And Amazon, especially right now in the current environment, the reward will be there if you're willing to kind of grind that out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a ton of light at the end of the tunnel. So maybe we can kind of speak to that a little bit and just highlight a handful of brands that have successfully done this. And we always posit like control leads to profitable growth. That has been our shtick, that that's the drum we keep beating for years at a time here. And some of what we've seen is, just a handful of the brands here, right? Like, 39% revenue growth in the first year with integrative therapeutics, 400% revenue growth over 4 years with pure encapsulations. Spectra Baby, 73% average monthly revenue increase during the first year. Outlet, for you guys, I actually heard you guys had the highest growth of any of our brands from Q1 to Q2 this year, which is fantastic. So yeah, this is another slide that kind of showcases some of that. But I think to Steve's point, yeah, like we love these compliance numbers. These compliance numbers, meaning what percentage of all units sold are going through the authorized distributor at the authorized price. Like that is just money, because most of those brands come to us again at 10%, 11, 12, 8, 18%, rarely above 20% compliance. And once they're able to get into control, to his point, like the growth engine can just really start to accelerate. So I don't want to spend too much time kind of talking about some of these pieces here, but I would just say, our deck, so to speak, is full of folks really walking through this notion of how do I get in control? Okay, once I'm willing to kind of bite the bullet. And you kind of sound like a personal trainer there, Steve. So I think many of us here, it's like sometimes making that decision and making the commitment. It's not a Beachbody summer kind of fad. It's like a new life. It's a new commitment. It's a long change. So anyway, maybe I can come back to you for a second, Jared, because we didn't have a ton of time to talk about it earlier, but I think it's good. And then certainly, again, guys, if you have any other questions that you want to ask the panelists while you have them here, now's your chance. One of the comments, by the way, that came across that I think you alluded to as well, Steve, which is like, having a pricing policy is great, but if you don't do anything when people don't acquiesce, it's just a piece of paper. So I couldn't have said it any better. Like, it's exactly what it is. So for you, Jared, I know you've done a bunch of different models, right? Like you guys ran your own 3P. I think you did 1P for a while. You're kind of using Pattern now. Like help people understand what were some of the levers that you decided to pull or think through in which model was important to you guys?
Yeah, just to kind of give clarity that when Amazon or Outlet originally launched as a 3P vendor, we were the seller, and we were hesitant. We really cared about our brand, and we were worried of what Amazon would do and the price, what it would do to our pricing, etc. So we initially started in a 3P relationship and eventually moved to an FBA relationship, which and we saw really great growth, totally additive to the business. And Amazon started noticing that, and the calls started coming. We run into each other at trade shows, whatever it was. A lot of pressure for us to make that transition to 3P, and we were very, very hesitant to make that transition. And but they're quite persuasive, and they'll tell you that to streamline or to get access to all the best programs and stuff like that. They the ability to grow your business is going to be it's going to be best on in a 1P relationship. And so after almost a year and a half of pressure from Amazon, we finally said, you know what, Amazon's been a really great growth for our business. We kind of know how to, selective distribution, we can manage this, right? We made the jump to 1P. And I think it was probably about a week and a half later, maybe 3 weeks later, it was pretty abundantly clear to us that we had made a mistake. And we started down a path right after that to we talked about that death spiral. Sometimes it happens super quick, and sometimes it goes slow. Well, in our case, it happened even with, limited distribution, we went down a path and of just the death spiral. And so we started looking at moving back to 3P. We were super concerned. We'd become a pretty big part of 1P's business, and knew that was going to be a challenge. And we were actually quite scared to make that move. Would Amazon enforce us or make us stay 1P? Or shut off the 3P opportunity for us and make us do the 1P. And we were fortunate enough. We talked to dozens or a dozen or so reps and agencies. Do we go by ourselves? We talked to Pattern, and I think it's pretty obvious what we decided to do. And we've been really appreciative of the partnership. They have a lot of the tools. It's ultimately up to the brand. It's up to you guys to kind of control your price. There's some tools out there that are provided for you if that's something you want to get serious about. And it sounds like from Steve's standpoint, they're looking for people that are serious about it, like we are. But there's some really great tools. Encourage you to work with lawyers that understand this and make sure you're utilizing them. But that was our experience, and I think we're ready to commit to long-term to a 3P relationship with Amazon. And so it has not been worth it. In my experience, it hasn't been worth it going 1P. What the tools they unlock, it didn't make sense for us anyway.
Thanks. That's super helpful, Jared. Appreciate you sharing the experience with the folks on the call today. And I'll turn it over to you, Steve, again for some kind of closing thoughts. But I would just say, just back to the topic at hand, really is, if you were a sales leader, the reason why you only had a revenue target is because it was someone else's job to make the sale profitable. It was your job to get the sale, someone else's job to make sure it was profitable. And I would just say, like I said, it's starting to feel like an antiquated model, and that the best sales leaders that we're seeing are the ones that are leaning in, trying to figure this out. And I certainly don't expect I've never had one sales leader come in and just do this by themselves. They're having, to your point, have to engage, in-house counsel or the compliance team, certainly the executive stakeholders. It's very rare for us to engage any brand without speaking to head of marketing, head of e-commerce, head of sales, the C-suite, sometimes even the board making the decision, because it's a lifestyle change, to Steve's point. And so I would just encourage you, any of you thinking that you see these forces, that you're nodding your head as we're going through this, to be proactive and to not stick your head in the sand, because this is a problem that is not going to go away. And again, it's not really a business. It's not a 1P versus 3P discussion. It's a, how do I fix an omni-channel at play force that's potentially going to tank my business if I don't figure it out pretty quickly. So Steve, any other thought on your end before I kind of walk through these next steps here that most people have already read and answer any additional questions?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking of a challenge that's not going to go away, just if you look over my shoulder here, you can see that here in Utah, we're still suffering from lots of haze and smoke from the fires. And the other day, my daughter said, why don't they just build some massive fans that they put on the mountains and just blow the smoke out of the valley, and then we could have clear air again. And although kind of a great idea, it's like, until they go and extinguish the fires in Portland and California and Nevada, like, this isn't going away. Like, we're going to live in it. And so it's the same challenge. Until you're willing to go and extinguish these fires that are burning out of control, like this is not going to go away. And you're going to be living kind of in this cloud and this smoke for a while. The good news is, and maybe the great news is, that there's absolutely a method out of this. It doesn't matter if you're selling 1P. It doesn't matter if you're a large brand or a small brand. It doesn't matter if you sell through two-tier distribution or not. There is a solvable solution for this for every brand. And I'm not saying that we're the solution for everyone, but there is a path forward that every brand can find. And it's just going to take that kind of discipline and rigor to go ask the hard questions, uncover the challenges, and address them.
Love it. So maybe back to the exercise paradigm that I introduced earlier in your personal trainer. I would just say, if any of you guys want to hop on a call, walk through your own personal situation, have us run an analysis. We do a very in-depth comprehensive analysis, not just on the control side. We do it on the growth side, analyze all your competitors, analyze a lot of data around what's happening in your market, how your share is in those specific categories. What is your growth trajectory? What is your growth potential? Like, we'll do a very comprehensive, free, by the way, robust analysis on that brand. So I'll extend that as an invitation. But I would just say the high level kind of cliff notes here is, you know, what's next? If you bought into this concept of like, I need to be, you know, on the cutting edge of sales leadership, and this is how I'm going to get promoted, or this is how I'm going to grow. Or even if you're not in sales and you just attended this webinar, you're like, I'm going to get this to the sales guys. Like, think about this up front. Like, the next steps really are to create and enforce a MAP policy if you're in the US to gain control of the price, or at least to make sure everyone agrees on what the price is, that if you're going to stabilize it, this is the level that we want it at. Second, figure out a way to rationalize your distribution on e-commerce, ideally narrowing it down to one seller. We'd love to be that seller at Pattern, but it could be Amazon retail. It could be, you can be your own 3P. There are a lot of different models. And again, happy to walk people through or kind of evaluate the pros and cons. The next thing is attain that stabilized pricing across all those channels, which can only really happen by doing 1 and 2. Enact your quality control procedures and use technology to monitor prices. So we have technology here at Pattern. We don't really sell it as an a la carte thing, but all of our brands get free access to this technology that checks we have a feature called First Blood that shows who is lowering price first. Amazon a lot of times will say, we don't lower price, we just follow, we're followers. But that First Blood feature will actually show you exactly who lowered price. And spoiler alert, a lot of times Amazon is the one lowering prices. So make sure you use good technology to kind of monitor that. Before we kind of close out here, we just have a couple minutes left. I wanted to kind of address one question that came in that I think is super valuable as well. It said, you know, to what extent is the profitability flywheel dependent on your brand's competitive position in the market? Let's say I'm a challenger brand against a giant that has price erosion. I put in place all the control measures that retailers would like us to do. But in the end, the consumer may just keep buying from the competitor as they're perceived as good as we are, but cheaper. And the retailers will end up selling our competitor based on consumer demand. So I think it's totally legit question. To me, in that case, it would signal you don't necessarily have a pricing problem, or you don't have a distribution problem. You have a product problem or a competitive fit problem. That being said, you know, you just have to look at that competitor to say, well, is the competitor selling at a higher price in Best Buy or REI or Shields or Cabela's or whatever, Joann's, wherever they're at, and they're just selling lower on Amazon? Or indeed, do they just have a better value proposition or a more efficient supply chain or whatever it looks like? So again, happy to sit down with any of you guys to kind of walk through that. One of the things that we do is we look for adjacencies in product discovery and product design for the brands that we work with to help them really capitalize on shifts in consumer behavior or competitive trends, or, you know, blocking out those competitors. But I thought it was a good question, so I wanted to kind of raise it here again. Thank you guys so much for joining us. As I said, if you registered or attended the webinar today, you will get a recording of the webinar. And feel free to ask any of the questions, and I'll relay them to the panelists. My email is john@pattern.com, john@pattern.com. Thank you so much for joining again, and we will catch you guys on the next one.